Conscious consumerism, often referred to as ethical or responsible consumerism, represents a shift in consumer behavior towards making purchasing decisions that reflect personal values and awareness of the broader social, environmental, and ethical impact of those purchases. This trend has seen exponential growth over the past few decades, driven by increased awareness of social and environmental issues, as well as the rise of digital technologies that make information more accessible. As a result, many consumers today prioritize sustainability, fair labor practices, and transparency when making choices in the marketplace. The origins and evolution of conscious consumerism. Conscious consumerism is not a new concept, but it has evolved significantly over the years. In the early 20th century, consumers began to demand better labor conditions, such as fair wages and safe working environments, largely in response to the Industrial Revolution. However, it was not until the late 20th century, with the rise of globalized trade and multinational corporations, that the full scope of consumer power became apparent. In the 1960s and 1970s, the environmental and human rights movements gained traction, and consumers began to become more aware of how their purchases were linked to issues such as pollution, deforestation, and child labor. These movements led to the creation of certification programs like fair trade and organic labeling, which provided consumers with a way to make informed decisions about the products they bought. As global trade continued to expand in the 1980s and 1990s, the internet emerged as a powerful tool for spreading awareness about the consequences of consumer choices. Consumers were able to easily access information about the environmental impact of their purchases, such as carbon emissions, and the labor conditions behind the production of goods. This empowered consumers to demand more ethical and sustainable practices from companies, thus giving rise to the modern concept of conscious consumerism. Factors driving conscious consumerism. Several key factors have contributed to the rise of conscious consumerism in recent years. One of the most significant is the increasing awareness of environmental issues such as climate change, deforestation, and plastic pollution. As scientific evidence about the impact of human activity on the planet has mounted, consumers have become more conscious of the role that their purchasing decisions play in exacerbating or alleviating these problems. Social justice issues have also played a crucial role in the rise of conscious consumerism. Consumers are increasingly aware of the social implications of their purchases, particularly with regard to labor rights. The garment industry, for example, has been under intense scrutiny for its use of sweatshops and exploitative labor practices. This has led to a growing demand for brands that prioritize fair wages, safe working conditions, and ethical labor practices in their supply chains. Technology has also played a pivotal role in the rise of conscious consumerism. The internet and social media platforms have made it easier for consumers to access information about the ethical practices of companies. Websites like Good On You and Ethical Consumer provide reviews and ratings of brands based on their environmental, social, and ethical impact, making it easier for consumers to make informed choices. The power of social media has also amplified the voice of conscious consumers. Platforms like Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook allow consumers to share information about unethical practices and mobilize collective action. Activist campaigns such as Boycott Amazon and Boycott Nestle have gained significant traction in recent years, showing that consumers can use their purchasing power to challenge corporate giants. Another factor contributing to the rise of conscious consumerism is the growing demand for transparency. Consumers today expect brands to be open about their sourcing, manufacturing processes, and the impact of their products. This has led to a rise in the use of certifications and labels such as Fair Trade, B Corp, and Organic, which help consumers identify products that align with their values. Finally, millennials and Gen Z have been key drivers of the conscious consumerism movement. These generations tend to be more socially and environmentally aware and are willing to spend money on brands that align with their values. Research shows that millennials are more likely to choose sustainable products, even if they come with a higher price tag. This shift in consumer behavior is forcing brands to reconsider their practices and adopt more sustainable and ethical approaches to production and marketing. The impact of conscious consumerism. The rise of conscious consumerism has had a profound impact on both companies and the broader economy. For businesses, the pressure to adopt more sustainable and ethical practices has been a driving force behind corporate social responsibility (CSR) initiatives. Many companies now have dedicated CSR departments focused on reducing their environmental impact, improving labor conditions, and engaging in philanthropic activities. This shift has been driven by consumer demand for brands that reflect their values. In response to the growing demand for sustainable and ethical products, many companies have implemented changes to their supply chains. For example, fashion brands have embraced sustainable materials such as organic cotton and recycled polyester, and have moved towards more transparent and ethical sourcing practices. In the food industry, there has been a rise in plant-based and organic products, as well as an emphasis on reducing food waste and packaging waste. The impact of conscious consumerism is not limited to the private sector. Governments and international organizations have also taken notice of the trend and are implementing policies to encourage more sustainable and ethical practices. In some countries, legislation has been introduced that requires companies to disclose information about their environmental and social impact. For example, the European Union has introduced regulations that require companies to report on their environmental performance and supply chain transparency. At the same time, the rise of conscious consumerism has led to the growth of alternative economic models, such as the circular economy and the sharing economy. The circular economy emphasizes the importance of reusing and recycling materials, while the sharing economy promotes the idea of shared access to goods and services rather than ownership. These models have gained traction as consumers increasingly demand products and services that minimize waste and reduce the consumption of resources. However, while the rise of conscious consumerism has had a positive impact in many areas, there are challenges and limitations to this movement. One of the main criticisms is that it places the burden of responsibility on consumers, rather than addressing the structural issues within the global economy that contribute to environmental degradation and social injustice. Critics argue that conscious consumerism does not go far enough in challenging the underlying systems that perpetuate inequality and exploitation. Moreover, there are concerns about greenwashing, a practice in which companies market themselves as environmentally friendly or ethical without making meaningful changes to their practices. Some companies use vague or misleading claims about sustainability to appeal to conscious consumers without actually addressing the environmental or social issues at the core of their business. So, the future of conscious consumerism. As the global population continues to grow and the impacts of climate change become more pronounced, conscious consumerism is likely to become even more important in the coming years. Consumers will continue to demand greater transparency and accountability from companies, and the rise of new technologies will make it easier for consumers to access information about the products they buy. In the future, we may also see a greater emphasis on systems-based approaches to sustainability, where companies focus on the long-term impact of their entire supply chain rather than just individual products. Additionally, the rise of artificial intelligence and blockchain technology could enable greater traceability and accountability in supply chains, making it easier for consumers to track the origins and impact of the products they purchase. Ultimately, conscious consumerism represents a powerful shift in the way people approach consumption. It has the potential to drive positive change in the marketplace, encourage more sustainable practices, and challenge the status quo. However, for it to be truly effective, it must be part of a larger movement that addresses systemic issues and encourages companies, governments, and individuals to work together to create a more sustainable and equitable world. In conclusion, the rise of conscious consumerism reflects a growing awareness of the power of purchasing decisions in shaping the world around us. As consumers continue to prioritize ethical, social, and environmental considerations, businesses will be forced to adapt to meet these demands. While challenges remain, the future of conscious consumerism holds the potential to reshape industries and create a more sustainable, fair, and transparent global economy.